When you're doing art therapy, it's not about interpreting or predicting or projecting, because I can look at a picture of someone that a kid drew all in red and with lots of scribbles, and you'd look at that and you'd be like, well, maybe you were pretty pissed off when you drew that. But really, if you ask the kid, why did you choose red? Well, it's my favorite color. And so therefore, I'm using my favorite color to draw this person because of how much I love this person. It is so dependent on that person's interpretation and perception of what they're drawing. So I try to be really, really mindful of that if people ask me about art or ask me about art that other people have created. More often than not, the answer is I don't know, because I don't. I'm not that person who created it.
Right.
And I need their feedback as much as I need anything else when I'm looking at the art.
Welcome to Lived In by Zoe Therapy Services. I'm your host, Micah Faye, and I'm excited to share with you a community of experts who specialize in helping you feel fantastic. That's what Lived In aims to be, an online hub for DIY wellness led by the experts and curated by folks who care. In this wellness series, I interview Richmond community leaders, vendors, and healers to empower you with a toolkit, one filled with healthy practices to make every day just a little bit better. So welcome to Lived In, your online comfy couch, surrounded by friends and supported by experts. Come on in. We're excited to have you. Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Lived In. I'm your host, Micah Faye, and today we are with Julie Canda. She is not only a licensed professional counselor, but also a board-certified art therapist. Hi, Julie.
Hi.
We're glad you're here.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
So, Julie, you and I work for the same company, Zoe Therapy Services, and you are our new art therapist. So I'm curious, can you explain to me, as though I am a fifth grader, which should be easy because you work with them, right?
Yes.
What art therapy is and does.
So art therapy is, if you think about talk therapy, you're talking through experiences or feelings that are really hard for you. Sometimes for some people, words are not enough. Words don't come, you can't find the right words, and it doesn't feel right. Art therapy circumvents language, and it is a way to express and process those experiences without having to use words. So, and it can be as simple as drawing. It can be as diverse as using more sensory tools. You can use symbolism and metaphor and all of that. And that's just a different way of processing experiences. So for younger kids, it can be through art and play and finding a way to put imagery or to draw out or to, create those big feelings that are hard to talk about because they don't have that emotional vocabulary. When you get into teenagers and adults, because art therapy is not just for kids, because that's a big preconceived notion that a lot of people have, even up to a lot of professional counselors and social workers feeling as though, it's actually on the Virginia Board of Counseling exam, is that art therapy is best used for kids. I keep running into that in people that I supervise.
Really?
But really, it's beneficial for everybody. Just like I think therapy is beneficial for everybody. I think there's something to be said for having someone witness your story and be in your corner with you. I think art therapy can be beneficial for everybody because it's literally just using a different language.
Yeah.
And a lot of people have this idea that you must be good at art to use it. And it's not like that. It's really using this different language, these different tools to express something, whether or not that's creating something with clay or doing something really sensory, or being really slow and mindful and creating a sculpture, or learning a new technique. Art therapy can include learning new techniques that you never thought you'd use before. So there are a lot of different ways to use art in therapy, and art can be used as therapy, but art therapy can absolutely benefit anybody.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think we all think that we know about art therapy because we've maybe even like seen it in shows like Law and Order, right? Where the kid's been drawing a house that's burned down or whatever, you know, daddy's yelling at mommy. So talk me through some like sort of some of those preconceived notions that people have and how you combat them.
So a lot of people feel as though art therapy is like this sort of projective or predictive thing where people draw something and the art therapist looks at it and interprets it and is like, oh, you clearly have childhood trauma because you drew this. Like there can be indicators in drawings, but it doesn't work like that. It's not this thing where you draw a picture of a house burning down and you're like, okay, so your life is clearly in shambles. Like, sorry. It's more about the process and utilizing the process in a therapeutic way. Getting more in touch with mind and body and using your senses, that can be really, really helpful. Particularly in trauma processing, and that's something else that I do a lot with my clients and with people who I think are running into walls with processing their trauma. And the idea there is that when we experience trauma or traumatic events, the more logical side of our brain sort of goes offline.
Yeah.
And the sensory part, the creative part, the nonlinear part of our brain takes over. And that's why it can be really, really helpful to utilize art and imagery in processing that trauma. I think one of the ways that I try to combat this as much as possible is just by having really honest conversations with people if they have questions. You know, particularly in my work I supervise other therapists and I supervise counselors that are working toward their licensure. And when they have questions about utilizing art with kids or adults or teens or whomever, I try to give them really basic ideas of things that might be helpful. And I try to remind them it's not about this product that you're creating together, although that can be really lovely. But it's about the experience and the process of it.
Yeah. I wonder how you combat product versus process, because I think as minds get older, we become more self-critical.
Oh my gosh. And that's why so many adults are not interested in therapy at all. They are so hypercritical, particularly those with anxiety or depression. If they start to engage in something like, this looks terrible. And I'm like, the way that I try to handle that is with really consistent, unconditional, positive regard of, you know, this is a place where it really does not matter. I accept you. I accept what you're doing. It is okay. It's absolutely okay. And then verbally reminding them over and over again, it's not about how good it is.
Right.
It's not about the product. And reminding them and grounding them in the present of, what does it feel like?
Yeah.
What emotions are you noticing? What do you notice when you look at what you're creating? What do you notice about the sensations that you're experiencing? And that's a way to draw them from this future-oriented, anxious thinking of, what is this going to be? What is this going to be? And more about, what am I experiencing right now?
Wow.
Yeah.
So then, with kids, are they your larger clientele, or?
I would say historically I've worked mostly with kids and teenagers.
Okay.
I worked predominantly with teenagers with a history of trauma when I first graduated from grad school, and then continued on with teenagers. In the last probably 4 years or so, I've slowly sort of gravitated toward young adults, and particularly here at Zoe, my practice is predominantly adults.
Right. That's so cool, actually, that it's predominantly adults.
It's a lovely breath of fresh air. I would never trade my experience with kids for anything, and I will absolutely go back to them maybe when COVID is not a thing anymore. But it's really hard to engage young kids over that telehealth platform.
Oh, girl, don't I know it?
Yeah.
So I'm thinking about my teenagers that I teach, and we do a lot of coloring in real life and collaging, because I feel like young minds need it. But I get at the beginning, until they're like, oh, you're just like a woo-woo white lady. Okay, that's fine. You know?
I love that.
Yeah, like, they like tell the younger kids, they're like, she's weird, but also she loves you. So the thing I come up against is, like, this isn't how we should be spending our time, or like, shouldn't we read the story again instead of drawing our feelings, or like, wouldn't it be more useful if we wrote, or just like, miss, this is baby stuff. Like, I get that all the time. So I'm wondering how you break through that barrier with teenagers specifically.
Teenagers all the time are like, why are we doing this? And it's about drawing attention to, you don't have to be so critical. You don't got to judge this so much.
Yeah.
And a lot of it is just using humor, too, sometimes with teenagers. Like, I know a lot of teenagers that will say, like, I don't want to do this. And so I start with things that I know are user-friendly or that yield success with them.
Yeah.
So with a lot of teenagers, I might start with like an adult coloring book. That's a comfortable way to introduce art into a session.
Really?
Is it actually like art therapy? No, but it's a way to introduce the materials in a way that's familiar.
Yeah.
With some teenagers, particularly girls, they really like beads and jewelry or keychains, and that's something else I've done with people, is making those and kind of deciding, okay, this is going to be a mindfulness thing for you.
Yeah.
You keep this keychain, you keep this bracelet as something to touch and hold on to if you start to get anxious.
Right.
Those are ways that I introduce those. And then after I kind of have built up a little bit of faith, then I introduce, okay, this might feel a little weird, but I want you to try it with me.
Okay.
That's sort of how I introduce those things. If worse comes to worse, I just explain, like, hey, is it really that bad that you're doing something that doesn't take a lot of thought?
Yeah.
Like, it's kind of relaxing, right?
Yeah.
And then I do it with them.
Okay.
I think that is a big piece in saying, like, this is not just for young people. This is not just for little kids. This is for everybody, and I'm going to do it and show you that I enjoy it too. And that kind of helps with solidarity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wonder, do they ever think, well, like, you're good at this. Like, you're good at art. Look,
oh my
like
God,
how
all the
perfect yours is.
time.
Yeah.
I made affirmation cards with someone yesterday, and I was a little hesitant to show them what I had made because I also do a lot of calligraphy and a lot of hand lettering, and I can honestly, when I start to create something, I try not to think so much about the quality of what I'm making. But clearly, because I have an undergrad, I have a bachelor's in studio art with a focus on painting, and then I did 2 years of grad school with a lot of focus on art and portfolio.
Yeah.
So the skill is there. So what I try to do is I remind them, it's not about me.
Mm-hmm.
And if this is something that you're really excited about, I would be really happy to teach you what I know.
Yeah.
And that brings it back to them. And then if they do want to learn a new technique, it can foster some excitement and a sense of ownership and a sense of mastery.
Yeah.
And that's really helpful for confidence. If I'm working with you and you say, I really wish I could do that like you, I say, well, let me teach you.
Yeah.
And that opens that up a little bit more.
So how do your clients know to come to you? You know, at what point do I say to, a kid's parent, hey, I think art therapy is going to be a good thing for them?
A lot of the times they don't.
Yeah.
They really don't. Again, unless it's a younger kid and they have someone in their life, like, who's familiar with the mental health field or who has come into contact with someone who knows something about art therapy, they don't know.
Yeah.
Or if they have a child or adolescent who is already artistically inclined, and then they say, well, art therapy is a thing, maybe that would be really helpful. So I get a fair number of people who are like, I really love painting, I think this is going to be great. Awesome.
Yeah.
Perfect. Let's try it. But otherwise, it's happenstance.
Mm-hmm.
And that's okay too.
Yeah.
I don't get a ton of people that are like, I need art therapy. And that's okay with me. I'm absolutely okay with just introducing it as a novel concept to people that I'm already working with.
Yeah, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
So then let's talk out your journey, because obviously you have this incredible skill, right? So tell me sort of how you came to art.
Art has been my language since I was probably a toddler. Like, I have really, really distinct memories of learning to draw, learning to write my name when I was in preschool and kindergarten. I remember early on teachers telling me that I drew very well. And telling my parents that I drew very well. And so it was something that they placed a lot of emphasis on for a while. I didn't always think that I was going to use art. I thought it was just this very kind of cool but arbitrary skill that I had.
Yeah.
Like, I used it a lot in a lot of different ways through elementary and middle school, and then in high school I sort of branched out and tried some different things, and I may have been sort of tired of it at that point, but it wasn't until college when I was deciding on a major, and I started out as a drama and theater major, and then and I loved it. I did so much theater through high school and college, and I never really gave that up. But when it came down to the faculty that I loved the most, the people that I loved being around, and the actual work that I found most rejuvenating and exciting was the art.
Yeah.
So that brought me back to it. When I was a senior in undergrad, I was more determined to become like an actual paid artist than I was an art therapist. I had a minor in psychology because it was just this other language that I loved. I thought understanding people and their emotions was really central to my life in many ways. I think that's sort of how I'm built. And that came across in theater a lot too, really understanding how and why people act the way they do. But when some of my plans for becoming a professional artist did not pan out, I had my psychology advisor kind of point out to me like, hey, have you ever thought about art therapy as an option? And I was like, is that a thing? Like, that's really lovely. That's nice. That's these two languages that I really love that are married.
Yeah.
Let me figure that out. And I applied to 6 different programs in art therapy. And I'm very proud to say that I was admitted to 5, and ended up choosing George Washington up in D.C.
Yeah.
And it was awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a very natural thing for me.
That's cool. You have this motif of languages.
Yeah, I think that was something that stood out to me in the very beginning of art being this language that I use to express and explore these ideas.
Yeah.
And it continues. It's very. I find that the way that I refer to art as a language works in both layman's terms and in terms of art therapy.
Yeah.
And it speaks a lot to just general self-expression, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I went to school for theater.
Mm-hmm.
Musical theater.
That's so cool.
Concentrated in theater ed and voice.
Mm-hmm.
So did a lot of dialect work and that kind of stuff. Really fun. Since I was in high school, wanted to be a theater teacher. Like that is, I in my senior year, I taught a freshman class. My teacher just left the room, and he left me with them for an entire year. Like those kids are still my first babies. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And
That's so funny.
I
I taught workshops when I was a senior in high school.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I just felt so whole. Like it's the only time. Like I love doing this. I love being an English teacher. I do not feel whole. I feel whole when I get to teach kids theater.
Yeah.
I wonder how because that wasn't always your intention, right? Like you wanted to be a paid artist. I wonder how you came into this marriage, like you talk about, and how did you settle the artist side of yourself? Because I had to do that too. I like lived in New York for a summer and did the thing, and and it was awful.
That was one of the things that drove me from being a professional theater person was this fear, and this is more of a personal thing for me, but understanding that with theater comes so much rejection
every day.
Yeah, and I was not built that way. And so I think that was another thing that took me toward art, because although I enjoyed and was by no means bad at theater in any way, it wasn't as wholly natural to me as art. I think when it comes to my identity solely as an artist, that still is very incomplete. You're right.
Yeah.
And I don't have a problem with it at this moment.
Yeah.
I think I have grown and evolved, and the ways that I practice art are much smaller and much more mindful. And small things that I do, like journaling, or once upon a time I bullet journaled like a fiend. I did a lot of bullet journaling for a while. That's hard. That's really hard as any kind of artist.
Right.
How do you get back to your own identity as an artist?
Yeah.
How do you get back to that specific practice? And I think it takes a lot of intentionality.
Yeah.
I think it takes time and purpose and thoughtfulness and conscientiousness to say, I'm really going to do this and do this for me.
Yeah.
And also understanding and reconciling with that person that I was however many years ago that wanted to literally move to Ireland and become a professional artist.
Love it.
It's not who I am anymore.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful dream, but I have a different dream now, and that's okay.
What's the dream now?
Enjoying my family.
Yeah.
Enjoying my family and being the best mom and therapist that I can be.
Yeah.
And then maybe someday being able to piece in some of these other bits of my identity that I've put away for a while.
Yeah.
So at some point in my life, I'd like to be more part-time as a therapist and then reintroduce art as a practice, or reintroduce something else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm curious, do you sell any of your art currently?
I have, but not right now, no.
Yeah.
I definitely have. I've gone through stints where I've been really prolific with creating things and selling them.
Yeah.
I had a phase where I created jewelry and sold it every Friday. I took it with me to wherever I was working, and people would peruse through and pick out pieces I had made. And I've gone through phases where people have commissioned paintings from me, and it's okay.
Yeah.
It doesn't, and I think maybe that's the other piece of being a professional artist that I've been okay with saying goodbye to, because creating for other people is not the same as creating for yourself.
Ooh.
And truly, when people ask me to make something for them, it's not, I get more enjoyment out of seeing how they feel about it. I get more enjoyment when I create something for someone because I think they'll love it, as opposed to they've asked me for it.
Yeah.
Like old coworkers, I've made little paintings for them to put in their offices, and I've hand lettered quotes or things that I think would be meaningful to them.
Yeah.
But when someone comes to me and is like, can you create a logo for this? There's an inward sigh of, okay,
Yeah.
I'll do it.
Funny.
I love selling things that I've already made that people are drawn to and they enjoy.
Right. But you made them for you. And
But
then
I
someone
really,
else.
I much prefer to make for me. But that comes back to that language of self-expression, I think.
Yeah.
It's really about exploring and understanding myself through this other language.
I think with most of our guests, you all have such specific skill sets that are all centered around the human mind and its functionality, but also its like dysfunctionality. And I'm always curious how your practice changes the way you talk to yourself. And for you specifically, I want to know, when you're making art for yourself or for other people, how do you hold at bay that feeling of, well, this isn't good enough, this is blah, blah, blah?
It depends on what hat I have on at the time.
Okay.
And understanding the purpose of what I'm doing. So, for example, my mom.
Oh boy.
I love my mom. I do. She wanted me to paint a really, this big image of a magnolia for her living room.
Oh.
And magnolias have a special place in our hearts and our family. And so I said, absolutely, I'll do that. I love that idea. That painting is still unfinished. This was probably 3 years ago.
Really?
It's still unfinished up in my studio in my house.
Yeah.
Because of that very problem of, this doesn't look right, this is not good enough, this is not what I want it to be. And because it's for somebody else.
Yeah.
When I'm creating something, I have to be really mindful about why or what I'm doing. And then I have to really be mindful of my self-talk.
Yeah.
Of, this is not about the product. And I'm guilty of it just like anybody I work with. This is not about the product. This is about the experience. Julie, stay present. Stay connected. And pay attention to what you're experiencing.
Yeah.
As opposed to, well, this petal clearly is not the correct gradient of white to cream. Yeah.
Obvious.
Right. Obviously.
Magnolias are also very important to me. I have them painted all up on my wall.
That's amazing.
All the flowers of Virginia,
I
actually.
love it.
I love magnolias.
They're amazing.
I love that they can hold, they're so sacred and like specifically Southern, and it's like our history is so damaged and broken and evil, and like they still stand. I love that they almost recognize what they represent, and at the same time, they literally bloom into a new day. There's
something incredible and amazing about a really massive southern magnolia tree.
Oh yeah.
Like that's another piece of my dream, is having a really big magnolia tree.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, same, I think.
Anyway.
Yeah, we can not talk about magnolias, I guess. Maybe cut that part out. So how does being an art therapist affect the way that you talk to other people? I'm curious now. Like, do you ever find yourself
That's a really good question. It's a really good question. I don't know. Like, the first thing that comes to mind is, with other colleagues, particularly in a previous place that I worked, I would have colleagues come to me and be like, so this kid that I'm working with drew this in session. What do you think this means?
Oh.
And I'm like, well, I don't know. And that's really the truth, because when you're doing art therapy, it's not about interpreting or predicting or projecting, because I can look at a picture of someone that a kid drew all in red and with lots of scribbles, and you'd look at that and you'd be like, well, maybe you were pretty pissed off when you drew that. But really, if you ask the kid, why did you choose red? Well, it's my favorite color. And so therefore, I'm using my favorite color to draw this person because of how much I love this person. It is so dependent on that person's interpretation and perception of what they're drawing. Absolutely 1000%. So I try to be really, really mindful of that if people ask me about art or ask me about art that other people have created. More often than not, the answer is, I don't know, because I don't. I'm not that person who created it.
Right.
And I need their feedback as much as I need anything else when I'm looking at the art.
So then, is there like a standard way to do art therapy, or do you wait until you're with the person in the room and then you sort of create a plan for them?
It depends. You can do both. There's not a particular curriculum unless you've created a curriculum, which
Sure.
I have in the past. But I think for me as an art therapist, I like to wait and see what the person brings.
Yeah.
What do they bring to the session? What do they need that day?
Yeah.
Can I help them identify what they need? And how can we meet that need through creating? Unless I have a really good, unless I know that person really, really well, and I have a good idea of what it is that they are working on, I typically will wait and see what they bring to me. Working with someone for over a year and seeing them every week, I might have a toolbox to prescribe certain things. But if I'm just meeting someone, it's far more helpful to see where they are that day.
Right.
Yeah.
So I know you work mostly with adults now, but let's say I'm the parent of a kid, and I think that I want them to come see you. Can you sort of explain what that process looks like on the parents' end? Because I'm curious.
Well, I mean, it would be as simple as identifying any provider that you would want your child to see.
Okay.
If you wanted specifically an art therapist, you could search art therapy or search art therapists near me. But more specifically, you can look at the American Art Therapy Association website.
Wow.
And that has a lot of really good resources for people who don't understand what it is or want to learn more about it or to identify a provider.
Okay.
And then it's just like connecting to any other therapist for the most part. I mean, art therapists work in so many different capacities, just like a social worker or a counselor. They can work in hospitals, they can work in schools, they can work in private practice, work in lots of different areas. So it's just the matter of finding the right avenue to go through.
And then I don't know. I don't expect that teachers, parents would feel it's a foreign thing. You know what I mean? To have art therapy, but I wonder, like, what reservations they have almost about it, and like how do you combat that?
It might be similar to maybe play therapy, or I mean, a lot of people might have reservations. Because they have the preconceived notion that it's about, using mostly art and it's not going to be as effective as talk therapy.
Oh, yes.
That's a big one that I run into. Why are you all just drawing, or why are you just making things out of clay, or why are you just making keychains all day? It's gotten that one before. And it's simply educating them that this is another language that kids talk through. Like, a lot of kids will express themselves through play, particularly younger ones. Granted, I think a lot of people can benefit from play therapy, but it's the same with art. This is just another way of expressing oneself, particularly if they can't find the words to do it.
Yeah.
So it may look a certain way on the surface, but there's a clinical rationale behind a lot of different interventions that I might use.
Yeah.
And I would simply say, do you want to come into a session and ask the kid, hey, is it okay if mom or dad comes into the session and they do it with us?
Yeah. So then you're not an interpreter, you say,
No,
yes. So then what is your role? A guide?
I'm a guide, a facilitator. I might interpret if they want me to. And that it's the same with talk therapy. So if a client brings a dream to you and they talk to you about this dream that they had about a giant marshmallow eating them, they might say, what do you think that's about? And you might hope that the therapist would say, well, what do you think it's about? But it's the same thing with art. They can bring you a drawing or they can create something with you and they'd say, well, what do you see? What do you think? And I would turn it back on them and say, well, what do you think? And I would go with them and guide them with, well, what do you think this means? But I might also observe and point out observations of, well, I notice you place a lot of emphasis on this area. What do you think that means? Or I notice that, you really didn't want to use this material. Why do you think that was? And helping them just to increase insight around some of that to help them interpret, because I might see things that they don't make connections to.
Yeah. So occasionally an interpreter then.
Occasionally,
Yeah.
but not in that formal sense of like, you drew a bloody eye, that means X, Y, Z.
Right.
It doesn't, it's not a dictionary. Yeah.
I love that
Yeah.
idea. I have a question that you can choose to answer or to not answer, but as a child, my parents got divorced when I was like 4. I got sent to an art therapist.
Really?
And, yeah, I did.
That's funny.
But I was a very private child, and I remember this lady, and she was older, and she smelled really good, and that's what I remember about her. She smelled like incense. And if you're watching this, Miss Lady, hi. But I remember she would, and their divorce was nasty. There was a lot more going on than just divorce. And I think they were trying to use things I told her in court. But what I remember, Julie, is she would ask me these probing questions, and what I remember saying to her is, "Ma'am, we're here to learn art. Don't you think this is inappropriate?" And I know I said that to her like every session, Julie, and I know I did because that's just the kind of kid I was, and I that's the person I am now. But they didn't tell. My daddy told me, you're going to art lessons, and then this woman would be like, "Why is there a dark blot here?" And I'd be like, "That's my own personal thought, ma'am. You can back up with that."
Right.
I wonder, now that I'm talking to you, like, what was she reporting back to my dad?
No clue. I mean, she probably was reflecting on how strong your boundaries were. You were like, "No, we're not touching this. This is not the time to touch this, so we will not."
I wonder, though, like, if they had just told me she was an art therapist. Because my thought was like, "Ma'am, it's inappropriate for you to be digging in this way." But if I had known it was exactly her job to be digging that way, would I have responded differently?
You probably would have. You would have been like, "Okay, so this is a safe place to talk about these things."
Yeah.
But because you had this idea that she was a teacher.
Yeah.
No, of course you're probably not going to talk to your teachers about what a dark blob means to you.
Yeah.
So.
And I do remember, she would say, "I won't tell your daddy," but then I would hear her telling my daddy. So I was like.
Well, and that's the other thing of just being an effective and an ethical therapist is saying, there are some things I'm going to share with your parents, and there's some things I'm not.
Yeah.
Is that okay with you? And I'm going to give them really basic updates, but I'm not going to tell them super duper intense details about what we talk about.
Right.
Unless the obvious limits of confidentiality of hurting yourself, hurting others, or someone else hurting you. So I think that's a really important distinction to make for any adult who's taking their child to art therapy is, please don't call it an art lesson.
Wow. Hey, we learned one thing from my silly story, didn't we?
Yeah. And I feel like I've had that happen before with kiddos that come to me and they think that it's art lessons. Now, they still talk to me like a counselor because on some level they understand that this is a space to do that.
Yeah.
But that has happened when they've been like, "Well, what are we going to do today? What are you going to teach me today?" I've actually had someone refer to themselves as a student. And I'm like, I don't go too far out of my way to correct them, but I do gently remind them, like, this is more than just learning these things.
Yeah.
It's a space for you to talk about things too. Yeah.
Okay, so if I'm a parent, I don't tell my child that these are art lessons.
No.
Lest she should say, no.
There's art that can be a part of it.
Yeah.
But it's not a lesson or a class.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for helping me work through that weird memory that I just had.
It's so funny.
So my favorite thing that we do on the show is we ask someone with highly specified knowledge like yours, right? For a piece of your knowledge that we can take to care for our neighbors. So a technique, an idea, a piece of information, what can I take from Julie Canda, board certified art therapist, to take care of my community this week?
This was something that I've tried to think about a lot, and it's hard. It was hard for me to come up with something specific, and I think the best thing that I could come up with that made the most sense for what I do, which is to be mindful of other people's experiences and to be mindful of other people's trauma, because we all experience those things and it impacts us all in this vast spectrum of ways that we don't always understand. And so when we are dealing with other people, when we're dealing with neighbors, community members, whomever, and we may not understand how they're acting, it's taking the moment to accept that they have experienced life probably in a profoundly different way than we have. And that's extraordinarily important in today's culture and climate.
Sure.
Is really being mindful of other people's experiences. And being accepting and not jumping to conclusions about why they're acting the way they are.
Okay.
And having tolerance for other people.
A difficult one.
Yeah.
And what's one little piece of art or craft we should all go home and make today?
I'm a big fan of the doodle.
The doodle?
Just doodle something.
Yeah.
I get a lot of satisfaction out of doodling things in what is now a regular planner rather than a bullet journal. Doodling, and I don't know. That's what I like to do, and I think that's really accessible.
Yeah.
It's something everyone knows how to do, and everybody has their own little doodles that they do.
Yeah.
One of my former colleagues has this lovely habit of doodling houses and dogs on everything. Look at any of her notes. There's always a house and a dog on every single thing that she, like, meeting notes, just like notebooks. There's a house and a dog. And then if it's Christmas, there are Christmas trees. Because Christmas is her favorite. I just think everybody has their own habits that they doodle, and I think it's beautiful.
That's really cool. So we should all go home and doodle, and then be mindful that there is no end game.
No, it's not about how it looks.
Doodling. Yeah.
And it can be a meditative thing too, just like those coloring books that people do.
Yeah.
It's just doing something sensory, doing something kinesthetic with your hand.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm going to be mindful of other people's experience and maybe the languages that they speak and don't speak, metaphorically speaking.
Yes.
And I'm going to doodle today, so that's going to be fun. I doodle every day. I'm a big planner, and I like to doodle in my planner. So we've run over our hour, and
have we really?
I don't want to keep you. So last couple minutes, floor is yours. Tell us what's new, what's exciting, and tell us how we can come and see you.
If anyone wants to get in touch with me, or if there is someone who wants to find out more about art therapy, the Zoe website is a great resource. The American Art Therapy Association website is a wonderful resource.
Okay.
They can call the office.
You can call the office, 804-303-9622. Well, Julie Canda, it was very cool to hang out with you today.
Yeah.
I hope you enjoyed your tea made by the herbalists at Resolve Body Works.
It's delicious.
Good. It smells really good. Like, I can smell it over here. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really, I'm a big tea person. You should see my cabinet at home. I bought 2 more yesterday. I was like, I don't need these.
You should go see Mackenzie. She's a personal herbalist. So she will sit with you and talk with you about your symptoms, both physical and emotional, and then she will create your own blend. It's amazing. She's amazing. Well, again, Julie, thanks for talking about tea and working with me through that weird memory I had. And it was really, really great. Thank you.
Thank you.